Greetings, everybody. Thank you for joining. This is chapter 10 and probably one of our most exciting chapters to date on artificial intelligence and marketing. And I'm here with Mark Cowan. Mark, how are you today?
I'm great, Jim. Happy to be here and spending some time with you.
Before we jump in, obviously there's a lot of use cases for AI within marketing. Some of them are showcased here on the actual slide, but let's talk about defining exactly what AI is. Now, from my perspective, I see AI as a combination of algorithms and machine learning to do things without human intervention, to be as smart as a human, to be able to spot trends and opportunities. How would you define AI?
I think you touched on one of the aspects of the definition of AI, which is for it to be as smart as a human. The real question is, how old is that human, right, in that context? And is it a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 20-year-old, or so on? You're right, it is a collection of technologies that work together to simulate an intelligent type of function or a response.
I want to double click into how you said simulate.
Well, it's not organic. Let me say that. And I mean, sorry, to simulate, organic intelligence. Maybe there's other forms of intelligence out there in the universe, but as far as we know, there's really only organic intelligence here, or systemic intelligence. And this is essentially a man-made intelligence simulator that's, constructed of different underlying technologies that appear on the outside to have an intelligent like function or output that's comparable to a human. Now, just to be clear, it's not at the level of generalized intelligence where it has free form association and can do all these wonderful things like a human can do. It's a machine, and it's limited to how it's taught and what the inputs are going into it.
Okay, we'll talk more about that. Actually, I've got a number of questions on how we integrate AI into the human process. But let's jump into the problem, big picture. And I like to think of this as kind of the elephant in the room problem that people don't really talk about. So if you think about getting your arms around all data, and we've covered this in a number of chapters to date, it's a very difficult process. Now, when you think about what it takes to bring data scientists in to help you work on your particular problem, that's extremely difficult to think about, considering there are so few qualified data scientists on Earth. So what is your positioning around how we can solve this mismatch?
I think first is that it's not that we have to take anything away from the data scientists, is that we just have to be able to project what the data scientists do out into the audience further, right? Or into the universe further. And so democratize it in some way is probably a better way of saying it as a starting point. You're absolutely right here that if you think about the enormity of the problem, number one, which is like, okay, hey, we just have to be able to get our data organized and structured in a way that we can use it inside of our everyday applications. That is a huge and massive and continuous ongoing challenging in even the best run organizations in the world. Now, if you layer in, the data science aspect into that, if you put that into an organization that maybe doesn't have all the operational maturity or is self-aware enough and how to use it and how to answer it, it becomes something that is very, underutilized or not well understood, and so doesn't get used as effectively inside of an organization. I think for anyone who's probably listening to this who may be a data scientist, knows all too well that many organizations equate business intelligence with data scientists, and the two are not the same. And so it's about a question of understanding really what it is that somebody needs to do and what are the resources, skills, and platforms that you need in order to solve that problem.
So let's double click into that. Like, I always like to think about other AI-based solutions, like Waze is a navigation system which takes in tons of data points, tons of information from other drivers, real-time feeds, and presents the user with options. And the user has a choice of following the Waze recommendation, ignoring it, or taking elements of it. So how do you recommend an operation integrates, say, a virtual team of AI professionals to help decision makers within the marketing enterprise operate?
So your example of Waze or any kind of autocomplete function follows a very standardized pattern, and it's an important one. And I'm not, throwing shade on or, kind of any of those types of problems where you have autocomplete and so on, because they are complex, certainly. But they're actually solving one type of problem and just various themes of them, which is like, I need to get from A to B and fill in the blank, right? So whether that's turn by turn analysis, or, next, best action expressed as a turn, or, autocomplete my sentence as I'm filling into a search bar. They're all the similar design problem and pattern that they're being solved for. Inside of the context of marketing, it's a little bit different in that the variables are unknown that you're working with, right? And so you're working with, humans punching values into a machine. You're dealing with, a lot of dynamics in a marketplace. And so the best thing you can do in there is actually really design an algorithm to help you understand and ask the right question of all these different data points that are happening, so that you can interpret them and interpret all those signals at scale. And that's really what, AI does quite well, is it helps identify sort of the correlations, and then, creates a predicted or probable outcome based on correlations and the input data that it's working with.
Jump into why this is very, very important. Obviously, as you say, this is probably the most important transition, which is going to drive user experience for generation. To have that, what you just mentioned, that depth of insight at scale, we'll talk about the process as well in a minute, requires a very different way of operating, which is different to how companies work today. And of course, the end game, like we hinted at, is to have that virtual team of data scientists that can analyze all the data and furnish those insights in real time. What would you add to that as well, on top of what you've already said? And again, think in terms of the sheer volume of data that has to be crunched in real time, and then which elements of findings need to be offered up into the decision-making process within the enterprise.
I think, just to keep it very simple, the way to intellectually, I think if you are to approach this from a design perspective, it's just really important to, maybe have this dividing line, which is, there's below the API. So a la what's inside of an application, or inside of a business process, or inside of a solution, et cetera. And then there's above the API, right? Anything that happens below the API is inside the app, one way or another. And there's really incredible amount of commonality across all applications, which is they do really one or two things really well. One is they capture information, and two is they store that information. And that's essentially the design pattern that exists across all applications out there. Now, when you layer in AI, it is actually on top of the API for the most part. And so it's actually working with the data that's captured inside of those applications. So to make it really simple, to think about the way to apply AI in your organization is, how do you, leverage the data that you have, access it through that API layer that you have, so that you can do something different with it outside of the application. Now, that may be an insight, that may be an answer, that may be a numerical, it may be something, that you're trying to drive towards, but it really is about taking it outside of the application to work with.
I like that. Okay, the process. So this process actually is quite similar in many ways to some of the processes we showcased in some of the previous chapters. But can you walk us through the process for bringing AI into the enterprise, where you would begin and where you would end, and how you would continually refine? And what I mean by that is, as you walk through this, the key that I see to AI, again, it's not that magic wand. It's something that the enterprise and the experts within the company need to school as they go through the whole process. So if you could weave that in as well as you walk us through the flow.
Yeah, and just on your last point there, this is a fundamental shift in the way to think about information technology inside the enterprise. We've spent the last 40, 50 years really being driven around, process efficiency and, business innovation based on efficiency and computing resources. The AI paradigm, along with perhaps blockchain, are two fundamental shifts in the way we think about information technology inside the enterprise. And so from a process perspective here, the first thing to think about is like, well, how do you get access to feed the machine, right? So access to the data, which means connecting to them, being able to absorb that information that you want to have. Then essentially pumping that into, a reference model where the algorithms sit. And what I mean by algorithm is, essentially the formula that you run your data through to develop your insight, or look for the correlation or the outcome that you're trying to find, and assign a probability to that. Now, one thing that we do inside Put It Forward as well is we've created benchmarks based on, large chunks of data across, multiple different industries and so on, that help people get another layer of correlation about their outcome and remove bias that they may have. And so this allows you to, identify, kind of in the moment events, as it were. Think about an in the moment event as like an optimal price or an optimal time, or an optimal set of conditions upon which you want to actually do something. And then you fire, right? You do something, you trigger an event. That event may be as simple as sending someone an email. It may be, sending an alert that a potential fraud is in play. It can go through all different levels here, and then, drive that into into two things. One is a series of alerts that, trigger other events to happen in other applications. And the second is to surface data up in front of an end user so that they can make a decision on, what they may be a part of at that moment in time.
So the results from all of this, basically what you're positioning here is, working with Put It Forward, you get a virtual data intelligence team. So you don't need to recruit your own data scientists, but you can operate at a level as if you had a team of data scientists on staff. And with everything that we spoke about up to now, this gives you the confidence to understand which offers, campaigns, etc., are weighted the way they are, and where to focus which customer segments, which campaigns, which offers. Any other elements of results you'd like to touch on?
No, I think really the benefit to AI inside any organization is going to be directly correlated, as you call out here, in terms of how effectively you can democratize that. And what I mean by democratize that is how widely you can disperse it and make it useful in, everybody's every action, every event that they take every moment of the day. That's going to be the true value of it. As it gets wider and wider, adopted, it also needs to be wider and wider proliferated in order for it to work. That's what I think is kind of the real part here behind, the message of what we're conveying today.
So another quick way to summarize the results is AI basically helps the enterprise crunch a whole ton of structured and unstructured data and then deliver decision support to the enterprise.
But yes, absolutely.
So the key takeaways, and this goes back to a concept we covered in previous chapters, depth at scale is critical to building solid customer experiences. The other element, of course, is using AI. It enables the enterprise to identify very, very precise audience segments, to find the in-the-moment buyer. Thank you for talking about that in-the-moment element, which is very important. And also, BlackBoxAI tools won't give this to you. This is the misconception that people can just bring on an AI tool or license one and expect it to do everything. And there will never be enough data scientists to help you out. Anything you'd like to add to that, or any elements you'd like to stress further?
Probably stress each one of those, but I would say probably the BlackBoxAI component of that, is probably the most important. Just because there's AI embedded inside of an application doesn't make it any smarter, right, or any better. It may have some kind of localized or regionalized benefit to it, but there still needs to be an operational, process wrapped around that. And an everyday example you can think about out there is, the large hedge funds, that exist in the financial trading, part of the economy, is that, they've been driving their business based on, not necessarily pure AI. It certainly is a component of what they're doing now, but around, aggressive algorithmic modeling. It's not just, one person sitting inside of a room with a computer, market modeling. There's tons of people around that still have to act, right? And so the moral of that, or the lesson of that, is that it's a component of what you do. It is not what you do in order to create value inside of your enterprise.
That's a very good example. I know the financial services industry has been trying to crack this for at least 25 years and pumped a lot of money into it. And I'm sure it's about to become, next level. That's why they believe that, I think it's 80 to 90% of all trades that happen in the markets are actually programmatic. They're not done by humans anymore. Well, thank you so much again, Mark. That was a very exciting session. If you actually, just as a sidebar to pull you down another rabbit hole, if you see these 10 different categories that can be fueled by AI as we go forward, things like online advertising, content creation, email marketing campaigns, e-commerce, predictive analytics, where would you believe the top 3 opportunity areas are for the enterprise to leverage your AI today? Imagine a B2B business first, and then we'll have a look at a B2C business.
Predictive analytics, absolutely. and related to also online advertising, and anything to do with personalization. So all the content curation aspect of it. Content generation, not so much. As probably the top maybe three in the B2B space, anyways. Yeah.
And then on the B2C side, because things like messaging is very, very important around personalization. I'm sure things like web personalization, which we covered in a previous chapter, which also touches on content generation, I'm sure they would be touched to bring about a more personalized user experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And also e-com, right? And
Yep.
so think about, abandoned primary display page, and what's propensity for someone to actually, leave, and how do you, keep them on that and keep them engaged, and what are the signals that somebody is, exhibiting that they may be, a churn or at flight risk, and how do you keep them on, right? Yeah. And relating that to, net promoter scores, and kind of doing a lot of insight there to create a very personalized experience for somebody as they're going through that. But also e-com and B2C types of scenarios are very transactional by their nature. So the timeliness of the event that you're focused on is generally very, very short. And so you have to be very, very precise about what it is you're doing too.
Excellent. Brilliant insight. Once again, thank you so much, Mark, for your time. And we look forward to chapter 11.
Yep. Thank you. My pleasure. Bye-bye.